you all know, the World Trade Center is a premier two-way trade organization. Although it says Miami, our reach is far beyond that through Latin America, as well as through Asia and up the U.S.
So you can imagine how thrilling it was that my first job out of law school was, at the time, it was called the U.S. Customs Service, now CBP, and they said after 1 or 2 years, hey kid, you seem to know what's going on, will you help us negotiate the new NAFTA? So I was the staff lead at the time to go through, look at all those marking rules. We had the Canadian, Mexican, US delegation. We locked ourselves up in the Office of Department of Treasury to figure it out. We went down to Mexico City to the Camino Real, if that's still there, that hotel, I think, right? And we locked ourselves up there, we figured them out. The good and bad news in certain respects is that the marking rules are done with, that we, through the renegotiation, it's just gonna be the preference rules and the other substantial transformation rules. But these are the kinds of things that, these nuances that we're gonna need to think about and really look at.
So obviously data is a good way to start. And Ken, I'm always get nervous whenever there's data around. Ken is the data guru. But this gives you an idea of GDP. You'll tell me later. This gives you an idea of GDP. So we look at the GDP of Canada, 1.7 trillion. GDP of Mexico, 1.2 trillion. GDP of Florida, 1 trillion.
That's all right.
South of that, GDP of the South Florida region, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, 354 billion. That's comparable to the GDP of Hong Kong. On exports, this is stuff that's produced here in the state of Florida that goes to Mexico and it goes to Canada for the past 3 years. State imports. So this is not the pass-through cargo. This is stuff that stays here in Florida, that we consume, that goes into imports, into manufacturing, that's part of our local economy. We actually pass through a lot in merchandise trade, much more than that, but this is direct Florida origin exports and state imports in terms of consumption market. The USMCA is currently about 14% of our trade numbers, which isn't a bad thing. It's actually pretty solid, with a lot of opportunity to grow. When we look at top trading partners for the state of Florida, Mexico and Canada are amongst the top 5. Not included here is services. Mexico and Canada are also top 5 trading partners for services. That's architecture, engineering, what FCBF does, logistics, distribution, transportation, customs brokers, all of that is tied into the services economy and the services trade that we have here in South Florida and in the state of Florida with USMCA region. So does USMCA matter to the state of Florida and to South Florida? Absolutely.
He is an exceptional negotiator and also working on behalf of Mexico. And what always was very important for him to be fair and to find something that will be beneficial for everyone. So that says a lot about his work, his character. So I'm so glad that you accepted also to be here with us.
I mean, in Mexico, there was a clear perception the economy is not growing. The government has put a lot of sort of all the eggs in the basket of saying, now we have USMCA, we're going to start growing, we really need this, right? So they had a lot of pressure to get it done. And I don't think we used our leverage correctly vis-a-vis the US, because it was clear, at least to me, that both Democrats and the president wanted to have USMCA ready by the time the US elections campaign kicked into high gear, because they can go and say, look, you know, we're really working in a bipartisan way. I don't know so much now after the impeachment, but basically working on strengthening the economy. So Mexico could have sat down and said, well, guess what? You know, I know you're in a hurry, but you know, we need certain things too. Here you see all the asks from the US and how Mexico resolved them. But how about having brought to the table the issue of temporary entry professionals, more commitments on the issues on agriculture, especially SPS and science-based, you know, procedures, putting Mexico on a priority list to be able to have the risk assessments and be able to export more vegetables in the US and fruits. So there were many things that were left out of the table, I think, because of this political pressure that was done to get this, the addendum. Normally in the NAFTA, one of the big advantages is that you work on all sectors towards regulatory convergence between the 3 countries on all fronts. Here we have, I think, 8 years in Canada, 12 years in the US, and in Mexico it's a big question mark. Because the original NAFTA talks about 5 years protection for pharmaceuticals. We didn't even have biologics back then. So Mexico very quickly is going to have to legislate and regulate through secondary laws to really provide some sort of certainty to pharmaceutical companies and innovators as to how their products are going to be treated in the future. And I don't think that's necessarily good for innovation and for investment in Mexico. So I put a big question mark on seeing the biologics provision as a win for Mexico. Mexico is really banking as a country on the benefits of USMCA and the long-term certainty that it gives to investors and exporters. I think it's been overplayed because, as I always mention, despite it being close to my heart, trade policy by itself does not make a country grow. It has to be accompanied by the domestic measures that really create a proper business environment. And not just that, also on the social level. You need education reform, you need health, you need transportation for the population, you need law and order and security. All of these elements combined, plus an open agenda towards the world, is what can really raise a country out of poverty.
Economics versus politics are crucial as well for people to understand. And we're in the process of selling this to everybody too. You know, our ratification, we're in our system, the second reading. It's just, we had an election when the new stuff came in. I don't think we're seeing any slow approach or any controversy around the ratification, but it just will take a little bit of time.
The minimis provision is very, very interesting because this was one of those elements where we saw contradictions in the U.S. position. You know, on the one hand, there was this desire to really tighten the screws and you know, North America for North Americans when it came to the auto sector and textiles and others. And at the same time, on the issue of the minimis, we had to strike a balance because the U.S. was saying, well, you know, we want to raise it to $800. And we already have a big issue in Mexico in terms of, you know, the de minimis, which was set at $50. If you raise it to $800, Secretary Guajardo, my boss, used to say, you know how many Chinese shirts can come in a package if you can bring in $100? So we struck a deal in which we are able to increase it to $117, and this had to do with the exchange rate of Canada because it was, you know, 120 Canadian. So, and it's something that is good. It will increase up to that level, you know, between, you know, the up to 50, nothing will be charged in terms of tariffs or anything. Between 50 and 117, you will get charged with the IVA, basically the national tax. And then from 117 upwards, it's just whether you comply with the NAFTA rules or not.
Good. I know, every time it doesn't matter, we'll get a lot of power out of it.